Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants from around the world for attending this event on the Paris Agreement Article 6 Implementation Partnership, A6IP. I would also like to thank all the speakers, panelists, and distinguished moderator from GGGI, and for the organizers in this event. Last year, COP27 emphasized the importance of implementing various initiatives to meet the Paris Agreement 1.5-degree goal and urged nations to consider and strengthen efforts to align their NDCs with this goal. High-integrity carbon market has become essential now. In this context, international cooperation under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement plays a crucial role. As the focus shifts to the implementation of Article 6, the A6IP was established at COP27. This partnership aims to promote international collaboration, enhance understanding and practical application of Article 6 rules, encourage the sharing of best practice and mutual learning, and build Article 6 capacity across nations and regions. The establishment of the center, serving as the Secretariat of the A6IP, was endorsed in the communique of the G7 Ministers meeting on climate, energy, and environment in Sapporo in April this year. The center is also positioned as an enabler of the principle of high-integrity carbon markets, which was mentioned in this year's G7 Leaders Communique. The partnership has rapidly expanded to include 74 countries with the involvement of over 100 international and regional organizations, research institutes, and numerous private sector companies. In the session, in session 1, my colleague Sako is going to present the overview of A6IP Center, and I would not like to speak in details. Anyway, A6IP Center will serve a secretariat, and they will take an important role for providing capacity building. This dialogue aims to share insights on the current state and challenges of Article 6 implementation and to generate momentum for enhanced support through our partnership. Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you, Vice Minister. Now let us begin session 1, presentations on A6IP in action. Our first presenter is Mr. Sadamitsu Sakoguchi, Assistant Director of the Office of Director for International Cooperation for Transition to Decarbonization and Sustainable Infrastructure of the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. Mr. Sakoguchi, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. So can we have a presentation? Okay. First of all, thank you for choosing our event, not the plenary meeting. And yeah, okay. So my name is Sako from the Ministry of Environment, Japan, and I hope this session gives you a better understanding in what Article 6 partnership, implementation partnership and its center are aiming for, and what other countries are doing in implementing Article 6. So starting from the brief explanation of Article 6 implementation partnership, or A6IP. So in order to promote international collaboration for capacity building related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, A6IP was established. Structure shows the interaction among all stakeholders related to Article 6, since each stakeholder has different roles. And in order to advance the implementation, those collaboration is needed. Area of work is listed in the box in orange. Sorry. It includes facilitating understanding of Article 6 rules and the linkages with NDCs, sharing good practices for institutional arrangement, and so on. As Mr. Matsuzawa said, so that's the next slide. Sorry about that. So in order to strengthen our collaboration, Japan has signed a letter with UNFCCC Secretariat and the World Bank. Okay, so this is what Mr. Matsuzawa said. So in addition to establishment of Article 6 implementation partnership, its center was formally established by the G7 ministers in this April. And G7 minister also endorsed the principle of high integrity carbon markets. And the center has the global mandate to promote the principle through capacity building. High integrity carbon markets must be consistent with ambitious science-aligned emission pathways to achieve net zero emission by 2050. For that, there are three types of integrities, namely supply-side integrity, demand-side integrity, and market integrity. Management structure of the Article 6 Implementation Partnership Center shows the advisory group on the top, and then Secretariat, which is served by Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and with three pillars of activities. Okay. We now have 74 partner countries, and this table shows the distribution of the partner countries in each region. As you can see, partners are participating from all over the world, and as the partnership is to promote international collaboration on capacity building through the exchange of good practices, it is crucial to have participation of entities with different backgrounds. Okay. There are also a variety of organizations joining this partnership, including UNFCCC Secretariat. There are a number of UN entities being partnered, and we also have multilateral and regional development banks, regional alliances, research institutes, and NGOs who are active in carbon market and Article 6. We are also developing private sector engagement as well. As explained in the first slide, in this partnership, we expect different stakeholders play different roles for Article 6 capacity building. Therefore, it is, again, important to have participation from different types of organizations to promote international collaboration. Okay. This slide shows the proposed timeline for the year 2023 and 2024. Detail will be explained later by IJ's colleague. So since the establishment of A6IP, plenary meetings and working groups have been organized, the second series of working groups have finished in November, and we have many events coming up. So this is it from my end, so thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sakoguchi. I would now like to welcome Mr. Abdusalim Rabi, Program Manager of A6IP Center.
Thank you, Risa. Please allow me, I want to just to be moving. First of all, thank you, Sakoguchi, and welcome everyone. Now I want to perhaps touch on how we are serving all this country who he just mentioned that they are a member, and how we are working with the supporting agency which are already a member. And she told me. Okay, I have to be back first. Okay, this is the team. And I think, sorry, we have even more too, that we are kind of building the airplane while flying. So this is our team, as well as this is our center, already newly established. So as Sakoguchi just mentioned, almost from last June, July, we are already functioning. The structure he already just mentioned, we are under the implementation partnership, and this is how we are focusing. So exactly what we are doing. We want to make it on this way. These are the activity. We have technical assistance. And in the technical assistance, so maybe some who are joining us today for the first time, technical assistance, we have two branches. One is general one, that any country or any stakeholders can learn about Article 6. So that one is mentioned there, training material and e-courses. And the other one is more specific capacity support, which is need-based or country-tailored support package. I think you heard yesterday that we already officially launched the start of the support package. This is for the technical assistance, and for the other one, we have stakeholder engagement. So we have open and free membership. You saw almost 74 countries. We have established a thematic working group meeting, network advocacy and resource leveraging, as well as co-producing. So this training material, we are going to develop them in collaboration with our partner. And for the information sharing, I hope you are watching. So we already developing a platform for information to share all the information related to Article 6. I will go in detail about each of them. For the general support, they are step-by-step guidance to deepen the understanding about the Article 6. We are focusing mainly on 3: authorization and reporting and tracking aspects, and we are targeting mainly the government official. The objective is to enhance interest in engaging, especially engage. So those who are not familiar with the Article 6, we can start with the basics so we can engage them or generate the interest so then they can engage, explain to them, and guidance and addressing those aspects. For the authorization, we already start actually drafting, and if you link, you can even find the first drafts or still zero draft of the authorization training material outline. We are focusing on the starting of the Paris Agreement concept, as well as what are the essence toward the authorization, what are the aspects under authorization, and for example, how after we authorize, how we report about them. As for the reporting and related training material, so also we are reporting about the background for reporting, what we report, how to report, when to report. So all these are training material about reporting. And the third, as I said before, the third training material is about tracking. So also we go also about the background for tracking. What are the current situation and challenge related to tracking? What are the possible options and learning from existing experience? So all these are table of contents in the training material, and we are developing them. So from this table or figure, what we can see here, these are the timeline to develop this training material. But I want to emphasize mainly not about the timeline, but how we are developing them. We developed zero draft by ourselves. Then we share and discuss at the second working groups. And then we share with external experts, such as, I mean, we have a lot of feedbacks. And then we reflect, and then we get the feedbacks from even in discussion with stakeholders at COPs. So from after COP, we are going to reflect. We have already zero draft ready, and we would like to start for reflecting and start for the implementation from March, inshallah. For the technical assistance, this is for the support package. I think also this is quite different if you take attention. So this also is need-based and country-tailored. The key difference between them is not only enhancing the interest in Article 6, but mainly assisting in implementing the Article 6. So this one is not just capacity building for training and workshop, taking photo and going home, is sitting down, designing what each country need one by one, and how we can take them from each steps for the implementation for Article 6. Those who are familiar with Article 6, maybe something could looks like this one. The first one is, of course, is the strategy at the top, is developing a strategy about Article 6. But then, if you develop a strategy, you have to translate it into legislation framework. And then from the legislation framework, you need to develop the institutional arrangement. And once all these things are there, then you start for the implementation. So the Article 6, is, we see it as kind of process, and then even you can get feedbacks. So starting from the strategy, then legal framework, institutional arrangement, and implementation processes, we can go for each steps from developing the eligible activity until the reporting and corresponding adjustment. When we say support package, we don't mean finance and it's blended or something. It's support package through all the steps in the authorization. And here we already started maybe officially receiving expression of interest. So far we got some few who are interested, and we can sit with them and design with them what they need. Example, this is the implementation schedule. Of course, if you see, the official launch was a few days ago, and then we have a first phase for 6 months, then around 24 months. I hope later on, if any country of you would like to get more detail, we can explain more. These last few days, just now we are getting receiving interest with, from Burundi, Nigeria, Tunisia, and Rwanda. And we are bringing down as Ghana as a reference case. Interesting is, Burundi, they don't have almost nothing. It's from scratch. Nigeria, they are expecting their first framework within the first quarter of this year. So they need the rest. Tunisia and Rwanda, they almost implemented until the institutional arrangement. But the final stage, they need all from the engaging the developer as well as the identification of project. But in the case of Rwanda, they need only mainly for tracking and reporting. So this is, you can see the difference. We will sit down with all of them or with some of them to see how we can fill this gap. Again, my key message today is not only capacity building just for taking photo or workshop and training and go home. It's taking hand by hand from the selection of the activity until the implementation. We hope so. Stakeholder engagement, as Saku just mentioned, we are engaging them through working group, through meeting, through conference, through such kind of gathering. Also, we are working with them. We already almost accomplished all the second meeting and so on, and we are planning for the third one. Information sharing, it looks like this one. If you come in the website, we are trying to map all the existing capacity building that's happening. So anyone can see if this one is in Africa or in Asia, or is by UNDP or GGGI or and so on. So we bring all of them and we classify them by category, or for example, even sometimes at a regional level, at legal level. So all this kind of information is online. That is helpful. So if I can say, this is the activity timeline, how we can update the database as well as a newsletter. Before to finish on this one, so what we say, taking from his words, we have almost 74 countries and almost 40 or other organizations and so on. How we can work together? We try to develop any overlap, but for sure there is room for everyone. So that's why we believe on three or few words. Some of them I already make it here, is global. The key word that this partnership is in Japan, but we are not promoting Japanese only scheme. So it's a global. So you are welcome. Anyone who is interested, we can work. Inclusive. Of course, we are not, this is wrong, this is big, this is small, this is large, this is LDC. So we work with everyone, and all the stakeholders are more than welcome. And complementary. So some are already doing, and we want to develop with them in a synergetic manner. I think I already have meeting a lot with many over the few days. We say, we can map the existing stakeholders and the existing initiatives, and we can see everyone how can what he or she or they can bring to the table. So this is the end of my slides. So I say welcome as a partner. So anyone who is interested to be a partner, you are more than welcome. And if you have any question, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
There's no time for Q&A. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to close session one by thanking the presenters for excellent presentations. Now let us start session two, entitled Leveraging Resources and Expertise to Effectively Advance the A6 Implementation Partnership. It's a panel discussion. The session will be moderated by Ms. Fenella Awan from GGGI. I'd like to welcome Fenella and the panelists onto the stage, please.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you very much to the Ministry of Environment of Japan for asking me to moderate this session. Delighted to see such a marvelous amount of activity going on to help countries to enter the market of Article 6. And the Article 6 Implementation Partnership, we've been active members of, my colleagues on the reporting and authorization working groups. So we have a great panel with us this evening, and a big panel, which is marvelous. And rather than go through and make introductions of everybody in one go and everybody lose count of who's who, I'm going to do it one at a time. And really, they're the experts who have experience and have been actors in this space. So I am also one of them, but I have the delight of standing here and speaking and moderating. So just as a scene setter and to start things off, I'd like to just explain a little bit about how we see capacity building at GGGI. So we're an intergovernmental organization. We are member-based, so quite similar to the A6IP. We are helping countries, our member countries, onto a pathway of green growth. I think that was the phrase we used back in 2012 that is neatly now encompassed in countries' nationally determined contributions. So we were pretty happy when the Paris Agreement was signed. It was kind of, our business plan. So what are we doing in carbon trading? What are any of us doing in carbon trading if our mission is green growth? In order to grow in a green way, you need finance. It's great writing reports of roadmaps and writing reports of what your targets should be and committing to NDCs. But apart from understanding how to do things, you need to finance them. And the traditional form of finance, climate finance, we see as being the GCF, the MDBs, the donor funding, that quite often comes in forms of loans or guarantees or some kind of leverage at concessional rates. That's great, but you've got to pay it back again, and it's finance. So to complement that, we feel that carbon finance is a very good form of a way to receive money flows into a country to help that green growth happen. And the difference of carbon trading is it's a commodity trade. So there's no burdening the government with debt, there's no lending, it is results-based. Of course, the disadvantage is that you've got to take the action beforehand and then get paid afterwards. So the two can work in parallel and hopefully accelerate what we call green growth. But climate goals, if you wish, and head towards net zero. So for many countries, it's not just about reducing emissions, it's actually about economic growth. It's just taking an alternative choice of how you do that. So we've been active working with a number of governments in starting to help our members on that pathway through knowledge sharing, through the reports of what's Article 6 all about, what does it mean. And we now work in about 12 to 14 countries. We expect that to probably triple over the next year or two. So it's a big and growing area. Someone asked me today, you know, what's the COP been like for you, as everybody's asking everyone the day before we finish. And I said, well, apart from being extremely busy, it's been extremely productive for us. You know, the rule book came through in 26. I think really 27, COP27, I mean, rather than year 27, is about the funding coming together and where's the money needing to point. And I think COP28 and post-COP28 is the implementation. But some have already started, so I would like to turn at that moment to our first speaker, who is Veronica Elgaert, who is Deputy Head of the International Climate Policy and Head of Bilateral Climate Agreements at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. And rather than explain the rest of it, I'll let you explain. Veronica, the Swiss government is a leader in this space, so please tell us about your work around capacity building and how you're starting to help countries enter Article 6.
Thank you very much and good evening. Well, maybe I start off where our journey started, and that is when we realized in Switzerland we might be ourselves learning much better, doing capacity building for ourselves by speaking to potential partners. So that was the very start, because if you're first one out, there is no answer yet, not even a precedent how to do it. So I think we are now have some early movers in the game, and it's very important, of course, to share the experiences with one another, and very appreciative of the program set up by the Japanese government, by what GGGI is doing, and we're also working ourselves with UNDP in this space to do a peer-to-peer learning, what it really is. If I may reflect on where it started, certainly the very first thing that needs to be in place to engage in Article 6 cooperation, it starts with having a clear division of roles, even within the government, who has the mandate to start even consulting and taking the various questions forward. So that's the very first point. And I think in this sense also the peer-to-peer learning and capacity building will evolve probably over time, with the focus on how to get even the ball rolling, how to then set up an authorization process, how to do this with registries and reporting to the Paris Agreement. And finally, we hope to soon also gain some first experiences on how best to place the carbon markets with NDCs, so we maximize climate benefits as well as social co-benefits and for our local communities. So I think it's for us as well, we have been in this for a bit now, but still it's very much a learning process on our end as well. And I think such platforms to exchange with having active engagement, finding out together is probably still the stage that we're in currently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And yes, I'm delighted to hear the phrase, and I think it has slipped out from a few buying governments, that it's been a learning experience for them as well. It's not as if the buyers came in going, yeah, we know how to do everything. So I think there have been some great lessons shared between the buyer governments and seller governments. Next, I'll move to Usman. And Usman is a great friend and is heading the West Africa Carbon Alliance. And also, importantly, I think I want to point out the fact that you are a member of COMNAC. And COMNAC is quite unique in the sense that it is an extremely highly technical, highly knowledgeable advisory group to the government of Senegal, and I think that has helped the country enormously in its pathway. But please tell us about what you've been doing and through the various groups that you're part of around capacity building and learnings.
Thank you, Fenella. I will start first sharing a bit our experience with the COMNAC. COMNAC is the Senegalese National Climate Change Committee, because since 2003 in Senegal, we have decided to create this National Climate Change Committee in order to take into consideration the cross-cutting issue of climate change, integrating in one committee all the key stakeholders, starting from the government entities, the private sector, the NGO, the youth community, the local communities. All these key stakeholders are in one committee created at a national level and called COMNAC. And this committee is serving as a kind of advisory body to the Ministry of Environment in charge of climate change activities. So several capacity building activities are organized at a country level to build, to improve their level of awareness on Article 6, but also on other issues related to climate change, technology transfer, financing, climate financing, transparency, all issues relative to climate change. We address them in this committee in order to have all the skills required in terms of advisory services to the Ministry of Environment. And the COMNAC is also involved in all process, starting from the negotiations under the UNFCCC framework to the process of accompanying the government in the negotiation of bilateral agreement like the one we had with Switzerland or with Japan or recently with Singapore. So this committee is really a good framework for Senegal to take into consideration all the main needs of the stakeholders involved in the identification and the implementation of climate projects in Senegal. But in another hand, I'm also the coordinator of the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. The alliance have been created by West African delegates just to avoid doing the same mistake that we did during the CDM, because it was a mechanism that was created for us, but we did not take advantage of it in Sub-Saharan Africa and mainly in West Africa. So we decided to organize ourselves to be better capacitated when it comes to participate to the negotiations on the UNFCCC, and also to provide some tools, documents for our government so that they know properly how to address this new challenge of Article 6 operationalization. That's why in 2022, we launched a blueprint for Article 6 readiness for West African countries with the support of our technical partners in the West African Alliance. We managed to have this document that is a kind of basic reference for all member countries to know how they should prepare themselves if they want to be really operational for Article 6. After that, we did some surveys to identify what are the key challenges, the barriers for our countries to generate projects that can be eligible for markets. And we developed some tools in that regard for countries, and we also managed to assess the level of readiness of each country and try to prepare what we call a country readiness support plan for each of the 16 member countries of our sub-region. So this is quite interesting and quite challenging, but we still lack resources to be able to cover all the member countries in our sub-region. That's where I think this kind of collaboration through this initiative of the Article 6 implementation platform is really helpful to take, to allow us to move forward in the readiness process, and also take into consideration all the issues that have been raised in the demand side of the markets, because we are willing to position ourselves as one of the most dynamic hub on carbon markets in the world. And in that regard, I think we will really expect a very fruitful collaboration with the A6 IP initiative, because Article 6 is about collaboration, it's about cooperation. And I think this is a good opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Usman. And you missed one. Yesterday, I had great pleasure in joining the Minister of Environment from Senegal and the Minister of Environment from Norway in the ministerial lounge, which I have to say is very glamorous if you ever get the chance to see inside it. Yes. Right, let me pass on. Thank you for all of that with many hats, I would say, Usman. Let me move on to someone else who has a bit of a dual role as well. So Malik he's a senior carbon pricing policy and advocacy advisor at Shell, specifically looking at the compliance markets, but he's also importantly co-chair of the International Emissions Trading Association. And IETA is probably the largest association of private sector players or actors looking at carbon. And so, Malik, can you explain a little bit about what IETA is doing in this space to help open up markets, and especially from a private sector point of view, as we've just heard from more government level? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Fenella. I think first off to start, just to say konnichiwa, and thanks for having me here. Also, thanks, Fenella, for moderating. It's good to see you on another panel, and thanks to the panelists. And finally, thanks to all of you. It's day 11. It's, I think, 7 p.m. And we're talking about carbon markets. And so really, I think the enthusiasm in this subject is there, and it's key. And I think it's what keeps me going. And I hope to continue to share that positive energy with all of you. So I think if we take a step back and think about what IETA does. So the International Emissions Trading Association is 300 plus members of private sector entities really looking to help deploy carbon markets. And we're part of this program, but also we do believe that the private sector has a role to play in the solution for decarbonization. And when I took over the role of the co-chair of the International Emissions Trading Association for Article 6, one of the first things that we did was publish a paper in the lead-up to Bonn last year of what governments can do to operationalize markets to maximize the role of the private sector. And there we talked about some of the things that Veronica mentioned. We talked about some of the things that Usman mentioned, which is one, let's highlight the role that Article 6 can play in helping governments achieve their NDC. And since we have Switzerland on the panel, I'll use that as a case study, and happy to be corrected. But one is, the Click Foundation, mentioned that, they've looked at their marginal abatement curve of the country. They've identified that they can abate many of the emissions domestically. But one of the sectors that they have challenge with is the transport sector, that no matter how many levers they push, there will be a residual amount that will need to be compensated. And so as a consequence, there, credits can be played as a role for that. And that's what we advocate for. Which sector does markets need to play a role in the relevant country? And then the second part of the paper talks about, will the country be a buyer or a seller? And how will that play a role in that? And finally, we get into a lot more of the nitty-gritty in terms of how to manage, legal ramifications such as revocations. But we also talk about some of the other things highlighted, such as capacity building. What role will be needed to help build up capacity? And Rabhi had a great slide that talked about the 4 different pillars. And there, let's take a health check and see, where can that play a role? And so from a policy perspective, those are some of the things that IETA does. But also we work on providing case studies of how to operationalize these principles. And at New York Climate Week, we published a paper called The Blueprint for Canada, which looked at all of these principles and how they can be operationalized 462 and 464. And so there it's really looking at a country that could be a buyer, it could be a seller, and looking at how those principles can be operationalized. And so those are some of the things that IETA does. The last thing that I'll talk about is the BPMI, which is the Business Partnership for Market Implementation. And they're working with the World Bank, working with key governments, looking at what role can the private sector play in developing partnerships to help accelerate decarbonization through markets. And so we do a bit of policy, we do a bit of capacity building, we do a lot of events. And so IETA is really trying to be a partner in the decarbonization through the use of markets. And so with that, I'll pause. But those are some of the things that we do at IETA.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Malik. And I think already with just 3 speakers, we've had such a large amount of work that's already been done to start this. But let me move on and get a little bit of a single country viewpoint here, a little bit more of a drill down. So I'd like to introduce Vaibhav, who is a fellow of the Council of Energy and Environment and Water, I'm not quite sure how the acronym is described, who has some excellent views around the Indian perspective and how carbon markets are opening up in India. Please.
Great, thank you. Very good evening to all of you. I come from CEW. We are one of the climate-related think tanks based in Delhi. And I lead the carbon markets work at CEW. So I'll probably talk about what is happening in India in the carbon markets debate. Traditionally, India has a lot of experience dealing with CDM credits, like offset credits from CDM, right? So a big perspective in terms of the thought process of all the Indian stakeholders was that carbon markets is an instrument for international climate finance. Now, that's the way the carbon markets debate was kind of framed within India, the instrument of international climate finance. Very recently, the government of India has passed a law. It's in the parliament, has passed both houses of the parliament around 7 months back. That talks about establishment of a domestic carbon market within India, which will have 2 components. So it will have a ETS kind of setup, a cap and trade setup. In addition, it will also have its own offset market, right? So now that's a very interesting kind of change in framing, because from viewing the carbon market as an instrument for international climate finance, now it is going to be used as an instrument for domestic decarbonization. This is kind of the first point I want to make. It's a very interesting development that has happened. This also shows that India is increasingly becoming serious about the decarbonization debate. Many different kinds of instruments are being used. This is not the first market-based mechanism that is being used in India. We already had something called the energy efficiency trading certificates, which is also a market-based instrument. There's also something called renewable energy trading certificates. So we already had experimented with a couple of mechanisms. Now, carbon markets is the third one right now, which is, of course, an economy-wide measure, right? So the government of India is going to start it. The other part is the offset part of it, which is also very interesting, because there is already some history of CDM markets. There is already a pretty vibrant voluntary offset market in India. Now, the government of India is also going to start its own offset market, right? And the way it is, the issue part of the credit issuance part is going to be done by the government of India, but the demand side is still voluntary. So that is kind of an interesting approach, because right now, if there is a big company that wants to demonstrate its, let's say, CSR commitments and wants to buy carbon credits and all, it used to buy from the voluntary market, right? Now the same company has an option of buying credits from the Government of India market. That market is also as far as the process goes, the institutional architecture is being set up. So the process of who will verify these credits, all those accredited agencies are being kind of listed, and that process is ongoing. It is expected that very soon, within 6-7 months, the project application and the usual process of an offset market will actually start happening in India. So the offset market will go online first, and then the ETS market also is expected to happen in a year from now. Some initial things will start happening in the ETS market. The government, as of now, has selected 4 sectors. So it has said steel, cement, fertilizers, and petrochemicals. These 4 sectors. But all of this is draft. There is no notification that this is the final list of sectors that will be covered, but at least there is an initial set of sectors that are being covered in this kind of ETS setup. And after that, so this is like a pilot kind of scheme that is going to begin in India. And yes, at some point, the other markets like the power sector is also going to be kind of brought into the picture. What is very interesting that in the original motivation, in the first white paper that the government published around ETS, a big motivation was actually CBAM. So it specifically mentioned that because CBAM is going to come in, and some of the export exposed sectors like steel and aluminum, they are going to be hit by CBAM in some way. So we need to find a mechanism to kind of discover carbon price in the Indian market, right? So now domestic ETS is that mechanism that they're using. So CBAM is a motivation, which is also kind of an interesting part of the development of India's market. The final point I want to make that this is a very new system, and very limited research has happened in terms of the Indian government is getting inputs from various experts and expert bodies like IETA, the World Bank, and many of those institutions. Still at the same time, the design of any carbon market has to be very context specific. So while a lot of things are kind of common, still a lot of things have to be decided by the context. And that's where there's a clear research gap, and that's where institutions like CW come in, where we try to do modeling for Indian carbon markets, those kinds of things, very India-specific research, taking India-specific data, both on abatement cost curves for Indian companies, thinking about what kind of policy targets, what is the level of stringency of policy targets, and what does it mean for the carbon prices, because that's a very important information for the government. Also, some interaction with existing policies. So carbon market is not going to operate in vacuum. There are already some existing policies, some very important policies like the Renewable Energy Certificate Trading Scheme, which are impacting the same potential sector. So there's a power sector, which will be eventually, or very soon in fact, under the carbon markets. It's also being guided by another very big instrument. And these policies are going to interact, and they are very interesting interaction effects, which we are trying to discover and inform policy through this kind of research. So a lot is happening. It is, just to conclude, carbon markets within the climate policy discourse. Carbon markets is the hottest debate in India right now. It is the hottest debate. People really want to know. At the same time, capacity are extremely limited. So this point about capacity building came. In fact, the knowledge of CDM market or offset market, the way they operate, it is tremendous in the Indian ecosystem. Everybody knows, like most of the people know, there's so many consultants who can tell you the whole process, right? Theoretically, people understand everything also about the offset markets, how they operate. Extremely limited understanding of the cap and trade scheme. Very, very limited understanding. So that's what also we are trying to do some simulation workshops with stakeholders and training here and there, so that it's a very different animal. In fact, interestingly, when we did the first simulation workshop, it was the room was like 200 people or so. After 4 hours of training, software-based training, the question that out of the 10 questions that were asked, 3 were CDM-related questions, which is fascinating to me that even after 4 hours of training, which is on ETS, and my first slide told that it is a very different animal, still 3 questions out of 10 talked about, okay, offset market kind of question, that will this methodology be approved or not? Those are the questions. So the capacity is, it kind of strikes you. It is very, very different world out there. So we are trying to, build those kind of capacities in an ecosystem, and hopefully, a lot of learning by doing will happen. Very interesting aspect of the ETS market. As we know, in the EU ETS and many other ETS system, it is allowance-based. The Indian government is calling the cap and trade market as a baseline and credit system. So they are looking at it in a very different way. So the allowances are given, let's say, in advance, and then you could trade or you could do whatever in the market. They're simply saying, no, there is a reference point, which is a historical year. And then there will be credits will be given post facto, like after the target year. So it's like a baseline. So they're calling it a baseline and credit system. Traditionally, we use this term for offset markets. Traditionally, the baseline and credit, right? But they are using the same term for an ETS kind of market, which is also a bit confusing for many people that how will it operate. We understand it better because we have been engaging now thinking about it. But this is also a bit some nuance in terms of the way it is going to operate in the Indian market. And yes, capacities are developing. We are also trying to understand the operational aspects of this kind of baseline and credit system in the Indian ecosystem. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion. I'll just end here.
Thank you very much. And in fact, the standardization of terms and language was actually brought up in a session regarding the inoperability between registries earlier this afternoon. Yes. It's very important. Right, let me move on to Emmanuel, who is an Associate Academic Officer at the UN University Vice-Rectorate in Europe. Long title. But please, may we have your reflections on the capacity building and how we are going to help countries to access Article 6. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And maybe first, I want to use this opportunity to thank the partnership and the Center for the invitation. I think also it's a great honor to share the podium with the distinguished panelists, and also I thank you all for coming. I would like to bring the perspective of a university, and this is based on experience that we have had in implementing such project around specific framework or policy areas. And the way I would like to structure my intervention, it's in three groups, starting with the first group, which is based on projects that we have implemented. We have, for example, an Input South project that focused on building capacity, building of youth, particularly women, through a South-South collaboration approach to create startups in their community around the global stocktake process. The second project that I also like to bring your attention that could help in the acceleration of the implementation of Article 6, it's our Green Innovation Project. It also focuses on strengthening entrepreneurship and soft skills of youth and women innovators in Africa. And we think that engaging youth by building their capacity around Article 6, by being able to innovate and create businesses in their respective country, it's the most practical way to create impact, because through such impact and enhancing livelihood, people learn from such experience and see the benefits around Article 6. And also, we should also not forget that the youths are the future, and definitely future leaders, so it makes a lot of sense to engage them early enough in this process through a meaningful way, but also solving the problem of employment that exists in most developing countries. Another important stakeholders that we think should be brought early enough in the process are university and academia as a whole, because and this could be through curriculum development and also in the form of conducting research, so as to inform the process of implementation through facts, because to have facts are very important. The second part of the implementation that was somehow touched during the first sector of the presentation is the idea of a platform. In our case, we see platform to be around a community of practice with different groups of experts. And we think such platform will continue the reporting process to ensure a continuity in the reporting process through exchange of knowledge and resources. But also, it should be a kind of a participating process whereby different stakeholders, such as university, research institutions, academic stakeholders, and their wider ecosystem can have a meaningful role leading specific goals of the partnership because only then they will be engaged in the process. And last but not least, the last contribution that I would like to make is more to have regular activities in the form of a summer school, because through this process you keep your stakeholder and the platform engaged every year, looking at specific topics related to the overall goal of the partnership. So we think that a summer school organized every year with the different partners being engaged will create a sustainable institutional relationship among different participants and the various stakeholders, utilizing online information for long-term engagement. I think I will stop here for now and wait for a second segment of questions. Thank you very much.
Emmanuel, thank you for that. You actually raised some really good points I want to spend a moment reflecting on before we go to our last speaker. Academia and youth and the importance of engaging with them. I think we don't necessarily link the chain up there very often. So communities of practice, I think, are essential. And I know GGGI and others, but the example from our organization is under one of our programs, we brought 4 countries together in one place just before the Subster in Bonn. And each country brought, as part of the program, 2 master's students who will spend a year being mentored by Article 6 experts in their country and the other countries in the community of practice. And we will do that. We'll have 2 master's students every year for 4 years over the scale of the program. So it is, I do agree, it's essential to do this. And summer schools, there is the International Carbon, ICAP, and I never remember what the A stands for. What is it? The International Carbon Asset Partnership? No? ICAP. They do a summer school, but it's not the same group every year. It's a new group every year, but it's amazing when you ask around the number of people who've actually participated in that. But I think your idea of a sort of top-up every year, if you will, of the new things that are going on is essentially important. And it's not, what does it produce? I think we have to be very clear on where we've seen results from this. And I'd like, for those who aren't so familiar with the CDM, to know that during the CDM, one country pushed on academia for training of its verifiers and validation bodies. They ended up with more CDM projects than any other country globally. So China's universities produce the project developers, the verifiers, the validators. It's a worthwhile exercise in my view. So thank you very much for that. Now, let me pass to our last speaker, who is Michael Iveno, who is a director at the National Council on Climate Change from Nigeria. So really excited to have you here, Michael. And I think you may have been, I cannot remember, but you may have been one of the countries who have already started speaking to the Article 6 implementation partnership. So please tell us your journey of capacity building in Nigeria.
Thank you so very much. Many thanks to the A6IP Coalition for this invitation. Nigeria is relatively new in this journey. We started the conversation sometime around late 2021, examining what options that was available to us, looking at ETS systems versus perhaps the cap and trade system. We quickly found that there was no infrastructure available to support any of those rather complex options. And perhaps that led us down the path of looking at the carbon markets as one very important way to do so. Right now, as was articulated during the presentation, where we are at, we're currently developing the framework itself and the subsidiary regulation that will support that framework. Now, this was announced in Sharm el-Sheikh, developing a partnership with the UNDP to support that process. And we had a one-year target to announce the outcome here in Dubai, but a number of things happened. One of them was a change in government. Naturally, there was supposed to be some interaction and approvals and setting up of the technical instruments required to operationalize that. And we also had a pause and reflect moment, learning from the Zimbabwe impacts and really trying to understand some of the pitfalls and the dangers around that process, and the interaction between the voluntary side and the compliance side, and some of those really important aspects to consider. And sometime in June 2023, we issued what we call the initial regulatory guidance, really speaking to Nigeria's vision for its participation in the carbon markets, specifically to incentivize climate positive behaviors amongst our domestic economic operators, incentivizing uptake of renewable energy sources. For us, as you probably know, we're a very fossil heavy country. We depend on a lot of that for our income. And therefore, putting in place mechanisms to support the decarbonization of our economic operations was really important. One of the barriers to entry for that, of course, is financing of those really high-cost projects to change your plants or to fuel switch from maybe a diesel-driven operation to renewable energy. They're really cost-intensive. So we found that the carbon markets really provided a good entry point to help provide the financing required to support some of those transitional elements that are required. And now, that for us has become one of the very important pathways to really catalyzing the required financing to support Nigeria's energy transition plan. So with respect to where things are now and the lessons learned, being here really has been quite a learning experience for me, listening to the different interventions and some of the really important takeaways that we could now take back home and look at how we could make that work for us. And so it's one of these the things. We expect that sometime around the first quarter of 2024, we would have some framework to share with the rest of the world, and really looking at developing strong bilaterals with countries on the ITMO side of things. With respect to the voluntary carbon markets and the evolving integrity issues around that, there's this emerging language around Paris-aligned transactions, and we're really looking to see how that's evolved. And the current conversation also, in terms of what is the involvement of host countries in that, are we going to, is that going to support the meeting of NDCs? All of that is evolving, and we're really looking at those opportunities. But for us, at the last high level on voluntary carbon market, Nigeria did declare its intention to support that, but it's going to be predicated on the ability of the country to participate and also look at opportunities to incentivize local action, and also what will be the governance mechanisms around those voluntary market transactions. So that for us is important. The work we're doing with Monsieur Fall and our colleagues at the West African Alliance is helping to help shape that narrative. But I do know that our bosses back home in the government are also kind of concerned about the white noise around these different transactions that have gone awry. And so we are looking to provide some comfort to them in helping to move this very quickly. There is not just a climate benefit for doing so, but there's an economic incentive for also doing that. If you recall, sometime in May of earlier this year, the government of Nigeria took the very bold but necessary step of removing fossil subsidies in the country, which for us represents a very important leap forward. and therefore the necessary financing to support the decarbonization chain really becomes important, and the carbon markets does present an opportunity for us to do so. I was very attentive in terms of looking at what would be the overall outcome with respect to the capacity building internally for the participants in country. We have found out, rather surprisingly, pleasantly so, that there's a groundswell of support for the adoption of the carbon markets as an important mechanism. But also we found out that the industry is a lot more knowledgeable than governments in some of these transactions. And for us, that means two things. First of all, we have to play catch up, that's one. Two, we have to involve a very wide range of stakeholders, from the participants themselves to the economic operators to the communities. Because if you involve them, they understand. If you build the capacity, they're a lot more primed to participate in the process. And for us, the biggest part of our rollout will be involve stakeholder validation, and that includes a very expansive capacity building within the respective sectors that are relevant in our NDCs. I do know there's interest of time, but the lessons learned for Nigeria really is huge. We understand that the global cooperation is at the heart of climate change action, and therefore the necessary support and collaboration with A6IP really becomes an important entry point for further conversations in this area. So we thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very, very much, Michael. I'm sorry to cut you a little bit short there, but I want to get round the panel once more and have time for questions from the audience before we close. So I did ask some of you, make sure you pay attention to the slides, because I'm going to ask you questions later. But it's more, we have the World Bank Programme for Market Implementation that has an Article 6 window. We have GGGI's work, we have the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP's work, we have the NDC Partnership, and we have the West African Alliance, the East African Alliance, we have work from ICAP. There's a growing list. So where I would like to see is, what are you seeing are the advantages that the Article 6 implementation partnership can bring, and where do you think possible gaps maybe from what you've seen on the screen so far? Thanks, Veronica. Or just talk about what gaps there may be.
It's true that, it's various platforms now and programs. But from where I sit, we're still in a very steep learning curve, and so I think to have various platforms, each one of them is going to be shifting its focus, bringing together slightly different partners to the table and look at different things. So I think it's actually a very, very good thing to have a few of them. Of course, we need to be very careful in not starting duplicating. But I think what we feel we also benefit ourselves most from right now, so that would be probably one of those gaps, is actually just as we have here on the panel, everyone bringing to the table what we do as homework and share those challenges and lessons learned. So for such programs, also to provide for this platform, it requires active participation, which is not that easy to design. But I think that is where we are at, in a stage of where peer-to-peer learning is really an important part of bringing this forward.
Thank you, Veronica. And I think that you raise an important point, because the donors that fund all of these programs that I mentioned it's not an incredibly wide group, and the request is always coordinate. So I do find that I spend as much time speaking to the peer organisations I work with as well as speaking to the countries we deploy in. Usman, your thoughts around capacity, needs in this area?
Thank you. I think for me it will be easy to address your question, because as an actor operational on the ground in terms of capacity building and need assessment, what I see as a gap, I can call it gap, or need for more focus, is first to work better on the project origination issue, because you cannot be active in the carbon market without having projects. And you cannot have projects without being able to address this barrier of origination. And the second thing is, you have already mentioned it, how to have local VVBs in our region. So local verification and validation bodies is something that is really important from West African perspective. And I think it is an area where we should focus capacity building activities. How to better strengthen the use of digitalization, and why not artificial intelligence, in order to facilitate the project origination issue, the monitoring issues, because of big opportunities that we have for the time being. And also another area that we also need more capacity building is to give tools. I think that you with GGGI have done something, but it needs to be really spread out. How to avoid overselling of credits in the context of the NDCs, because we were talking about in the negotiation about revocation of authorization, and one main reason could be the overselling of CAR of the host country. So I think we should provide a kind of tool or guideline for host countries in order to be able to deal with this kind of risk. The other issue, very important, I think that we need to have some capacity, is a guideline methodology for benefit sharing. Benefit sharing between importing and exporting country, and benefit sharing also inside the exporting countries. How to ensure that we have fair benefit sharing in the whole ecosystem. Another area also I think is very important from a West African perspective is capacity building for local communities, because they are a key stakeholder in the process, mainly when it comes to talk about nature-based solutions. I think we need to have dedicated materials, tools to see how we can accompany project developers in that area and how to build capacity for local communities and territories. The issue of communication, broader communication, awareness raising on carbon markets, because with all this complexity surrounding the carbon markets, we need to have material that can explain to the layman what carbon market is about, because sometimes even between experts, we have some difficulties to understand each other. So we need to have materials, communication materials that can help explain everything to the population so that they will be well informed and participate in all the process of implementation of projects. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Usman. I will say, Malik, if you could keep your comments short so that we have time to take some questions from the audience. Thank you. Malik.
Yeah, I think a couple of reflections. I think on the awareness raising, fully agree. I think carbon pricing and carbon markets can be a very complex subject, And so what we've done is a podcast on the energy podcast looking at how carbon markets can play a role in assisting decarbonization efforts. And I think information like that helps, bring key messages along for stakeholders and interested audience along. I think the one thing that also comes to mind is if we take a look at the history of carbon markets, in 1990, the first carbon price came into effect in Poland and Finland, less than half of global emissions. And today we're at around 23-25%. And the way we got there was through piloting, testing, experimenting, growing. It wasn't an overnight on-off switch. And I think, from a private sector perspective, piloting, testing, I think it can play a role. The entire economy doesn't need to fall under a carbon price overnight. You can test a sector or a pilot or a trade. And I think from a private sector perspective, that's something that we would encourage. And I think the last thing that we would say is if we take a look at the global emissions covered by a carbon price of the 25%, 98% are compliance and 2% are voluntary. And so I think what we need is more compliance, we need more voluntary, and we need more Article 6. And I think that the more efforts are underway to establish that through capacity building, through knowledge sharing, would help. And in the interest of time, I'll stop there, but happy to
Thank you.
elaborate.
That's great. Thanks, Malek. Please, further comments, but again, please keep them super short so we can take some questions.
Sure. So in terms of the work that is done by the World Bank and UNDP in terms of capacity building, they focus primarily on the government capacity building, right? That's where most of the kind of focus is. Let me ask this a very interesting question. So the team, let's say in India, I'll talk about India. So in India, government of India, the team that is thinking about carbon markets and is managing the whole process, how large would that team be? Any random guesses? 2 people. Right? So there are 2 people in India who are overseeing this whole process. They're supported by 4 or 5 very young consultants. So, and Article 6, right? What about Article 6? There is one expert from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy who kind of fronts the negotiation process. Their full-time job is actually renewable energy implementation. So 99% of the time, they're focusing on pushing RE. And whenever negotiations happen, they kind of try to understand what is the Article 6 debate, right? So this is the capacity gap that we are really talking about. And that's where I think the World Bank and the UNDP have miserably failed to just read the game. Because it is about developing the ecosystem. You cannot train 2 people and just imagine the capacity of the whole ecosystem will go up. It does not work that way. You have to think about building capacity of the ecosystem. And that's why I hope this particular partnership and the way it was framed, it also talks about many other stakeholders, research institutions. That is where the steady capacity, deep capacity will be in many of these ecosystems. It will never happen in the government ecosystem. So please think beyond it. That's extremely important for building deeper capacities. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad GGGI didn't come into that swiping. But I will say, of our 7-person delegation, we also then have 25 other people who are joined to the country delegations supporting them because of this lack of capacity. Please, onward to Emmanuel. To be very brief again, we only have 4 minutes and I'd love to take some questions.
Yes, I'm going to be very brief. And also, I'm glad you brought the example of students involved in the process. I also want to share that currently with the collaboration of the Regional Collaboration Center in Kampala, we are engaged in the supervision of 2 students addressing also topic on Article 6. And one of the topic also addresses the gap that Usman was talking, which is on the role of blockchain in establishing and enabling transparent carbon market in Africa. So I think that is our way, how we are engaging. We are already engaging youths in the process to build their capacity, but also to create awareness. And maybe the last thing to talk, just to add, is with a question related to where do we see carbon market developing. I think to make a meaningful impact, it's how the voluntary carbon market can can fund local climate action, because as we know, funding is a major challenge. So I think this is an area where Article 6 could explore to create funding for implementing local climate action. So I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I need one of Axel's red cards at this point. Right, last but not least, Michael, please.
Thank you very much. I think there was a very excellent intervention around the use of the elements to really bring along the decision makers into this process. One of the pushback we're getting from our leaders is the lack of understanding and what this really means for national policy. We've made a lot of traction, and I think we're gradually getting there. But a lot still needs to be done at the decision-making levels. Bringing them on board in terms of being able to articulate what this global cooperation means and what this instrument means in terms of opportunities for national development.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you. We now have time for questions. We have 2 minutes, 1 minute. Does anybody have a burning question? Axel.
Thank you very much. Axel Michaelova from Perspectives Climate Research and University of Zurich. My question would relate to the upscaling need for Article 6. And we've noted a few efforts to engage in policy crediting. How would the panel see efforts of really innovative capacity building that enables the upscaling that we all need if we look at the negotiations in the other rooms?
Wow, that's a tough one, Axel. So I think we can maybe more broadly, if you may allow me, Axel, to broaden this out to say, it's not just Article 6, it's also innovative approaches that scale up Article 6. So obviously we know it's needed, but is there any experience of trying to go further already? I don't know, maybe IETA might have a thought with a BPMI or something. Malik.
Thanks, Fenella. And Axel, good to see you again, old friend. So I think there was a paper published in Nature earlier this year that talked about the correlation between a high carbon price and innovation and patent technology. And I think there's something there where, markets work. That if you have the right price on the right sort of emissions, it's able to spur innovation. And I think something like the Article 6 implementation program is really trying to foster that knowledge sharing, those innovative policy frameworks. Because also, if we take a look at the history of transition, wood to coal, coal to oil, oil to gas, these were all techno-economically driven transitions. And this transition distinguishes itself because it's going through a socio-political lens. And there you're going to need innovative business models, you're going to need unprecedented collaboration across governments and the private sector. And I think a high carbon price is a part of it, but I think it's also a collective will to work together to unlock some of those through mandates, through pricing, and through a customer and a sector that's willing to engage. And so I think you're going to need all those ingredients, and that's some of the work that IETA engages in.
Thank you very much, Malik. And please, other panelists, I'll leave you to discuss with Axel afterwards. At this point, I'd just like to thank you all for your contributions. It was great, and I shall now pass to closing remarks.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your participation. Now, to close our side event, I would like to welcome Mr. Yoshihiro Mizutani,